Hi everyone, and welcome to Series 2 of the Confidence Conversations podcast. I'm Gail from Enrichment Coaching, and I'm a personal development and confidence coach. My vision is to live in a world where people feel confident to be their best authentic version of themselves every day. I really want to empower people to take action through exploring what I like to call their confidence DNA and how they can enrich it. So my style of coaching is really informal, it's conversational, and it will always be all about you. I'm not all about models and theory, although I do believe they have their time and place. I'm really actions focused, I'm direct, and there's no fluffy stuff involved. And I'm a big believer in pulling up your big pants and going and getting stuff done. Now, I love to make a difference to those beliefs that you have about what you think you can and cannot do. So if you've been thinking about how one-to-one coaching might work for you and you want to find out more, then get in touch through my website, which is enrichmentcoaching.co.uk, and you can find my links at the bottom of each show notes. So enough about me. I'm really excited to be back with Series 2 of the Confidence Conversations podcast with some incredible guests who are ready to talk honestly about them and their confidence. Now, for this series, rather than kind of general confidence conversations, we're going to be digging a bit deeper to understand more about the things that have an impact and the things that enrich your confidence. And remember, there's little to no editing, meaning the conversation you hear is really authentically confident. If you listen regularly, I'd love you to subscribe. And more than that, I'd love to hear what you think. So feel free to get in touch. So go on and listen to the latest episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Confidence Conversations podcast. I say this every time, but I'm genuinely really excited about today's guest. So a big welcome to Emily Perry from the People Consultancy. Have I said that right? I've got a funny feeling I've now said that wrong. Good, thank you.
No, you have. It's fine.
I'm going to get Emily to introduce herself in a second, but I'm so excited to have this conversation because we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. I'm really busy. And we just started talking about it. It's like, no, let's press record because otherwise we're going to talk about it and then the conversation's going to go on and we're not going to have recorded it. So Emily, welcome. Introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, who you are.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about this topic as well. So my name's Emily Perry, and for the last 20 odd years, I've worked sort of in and around the people profession, as it were. I have built my own HR consultancy from scratch, but a good sort of few years ago now, I actually had like a big period of burnout myself, and it kind of led me to go down the path of training as a coach. So that's what I do for the majority of my time now. I spend coaching. I do the odd sort of project here and there, but yeah, coaching is what I do. I tend to work with people that either have their own small businesses that are feeling really overwhelmed, that are experiencing burnout, that just can't see the wood for the trees, and that tends to be sort of my little sweet spot, really.
I love that. And I also love that most of us coaches do something else. So we primarily we love coaching. So I do a little bit of like workshop development, like leadership management. We like to dabble in other things.
We do.
I love that though. Because I think as well what it does is it makes us richer as people and as coaches, because we've got fingers in a few pies, and but I think sometimes as well, this perception of a coach, I've been at networking where you go, I'm a coach, and people kind of roll their eyes and you're like, no, let me tell you,
totally.
kind of what I do. And brilliant. Interesting. So before we get into imposter syndrome, tell me what confidence means to you.
Yeah, this was a tricky one actually when you sent it over in the questions, and I kind of had to sit and think about this because I definitely think that at lots of stages in my life, confidence has been something that I've really struggled with and have had loads of self-esteem problems and all that kind of stuff. But I think for me, feeling confident and having confidence is when you are really comfortable with yourself, and that leads you to feeling that actually everything as you are right now is enough, and that is okay. And when I feel like that, then I tend to feel quite confident, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how most people say, I kind of had to stop and really think about this, because we banned this word confidence around, don't we? But for me, there are so many elements that that make up confidence. And there's
Yes.
definitely this one about this feeling, this real kind of when I feel confident. And I'm not sure any of us can pin that on one thing because it's different for different people. It means
Yeah.
different things to everybody. I was chatting to
Yeah.
somebody earlier last week who was talking about actually they reframe confidence for courage. Because for me, the two are quite closely linked. Because actually, can you have one without the other? No, probably not. Because
Yeah.
you probably need a bit of courage to go off and do something to make you feel confident.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So once you start thinking about it, then I mean, there's all sorts of little, rabbit holes you could go down there. But how do you manage your own confidence? Because I know you've talked quite openly about kind of your burnout and that's got to have been a massive knock to your confidence as well. So what do you do now to manage that?
I think it's something that I have to kind of consciously work on sort of on a daily basis. And that's not to say that I believe in this thing that you are this never ending self-improvement project, because I don't want people to think that. But I think for me, it's knowing that when I'm starting to dip or when I'm not feeling great about myself, why is that? What am I not doing? How am I, not supporting myself? And I think it's just kind of constantly sort of checking in. I'm a big journaler. I do lots of journaling, and I think for me, it's when you start to feel that actually your confidence is waning or you're not feeling great about yourself, then I like to, go and sit in some quiet and sit and journal and kind of work out what's really going on and kind of what it is, and then think about ways that I can work with that. But yeah, totally. When I had my sort of period of burnout, I just, it totally knocked my confidence completely. And then there have been sort of other instances as well where that's definitely happened as well.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How I call a lot of this kind of confidence demons, and they can be as small or as big as you want them to be, from like self-doubt right through to I want to say really poor mental health, but I don't mean that quite as flippantly as it sounds. But all of these things affect it. And actually the research world on confidence is really small. There's not a lot there because most of the research focuses on poor mental health rather than the confident feeling that you described right at the beginning, which I think is quite interesting. And I think there's more coming now about, how we can build kind of confident feelings, be more courageous, all of that kind of thing. But at the moment, maybe there's a sign there. Maybe I need to do some research, but
there you go. There's another job.
I'll add it to my list. Why not? So let's talk imposter syndrome then. A massive confidence demon. One of the biggest comes
huge.
up loads. Huge, absolutely huge. Let's start with your definition of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. So my definition of imposter syndrome is, again, it goes back to a feeling. And again, a lot of the stuff I do is all about how you feel. But for me, it's that feeling that you are a complete fraud and that you are going to get caught out at any time. And it doesn't matter what anyone says to you. It doesn't matter how many qualifications you have, how many promotions you have, how many, accolades you win. There's this sense of dread and this sense of anxiety that you are going to get busted at any time. And that's how I would describe imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. So again, I've done a little bit of research around imposter syndrome, not to the depth that you have, but that's also my understanding. That, there's this, doesn't matter how qualified you are, how amazing you are at your job, however many times people tell you there's this innate kind of feeling of being a fraud.
Yes.
And that you're going to get found out. And it's probably worse at like 3 a.m. when you wake up and it's dark and everything starts going around in your mind because everything seems worse at that time of the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's sort of with imposter syndrome then comes a lot of other, I want to say side effects, but again, I don't mean that flippantly, but I think with imposter syndrome, there can be sort of this real sense of anxiety. It can feel like, you're just never enough. And you then go into lots of other different behaviours to try and compensate for that. And actually, it never seems to make things better. So it can feel like it's this cloud hanging over you. And I think the most interesting thing with imposter syndrome is when you sort of talk to people about it and when people sort of open up about it, what tends to happen is that it is typically sort of what you would deem to be quite a high achieving people that suffer with imposter syndrome. So like a lot of my clients, they might be CEOs of businesses, or they might be, you know, in really high sort of flying executive positions. And to the outside world, everyone would think that they're super successful and they've got everything together and that they must feel really confident and they must have everything together. But actually inside, it's this crippling sense that they are going to get found out, and it's a genuine fear within them. So yeah, it's quite a deep thing, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess one of my questions that I sent over to you was, so what for you is the difference between, I suppose, imposter syndrome and confidence, or self-doubt, I guess, is probably a better comparison, if you like.
Yeah, I think the two sort of can run along sort of side by side, but I think the main difference with imposter syndrome is that it doesn't sort of tend to apply to every area of your life. I think if you've got low self-confidence or low self-esteem, it, on the whole, it will apply in lots of different areas of your life, and it will stop you from doing things. So you'll be too scared to take that first step to apply for a promotion, or you won't know how to go about doing something because you feel like you haven't got the confidence to do it. But I think with imposter syndrome, it's more than that. It's almost the fear of losing what you have and what you have achieved, and that you've got there by a total fluke. You don't deserve it. And the key when you're sort of looking at imposter syndrome is it comes back to this thing called conditional worth. And it's how we place our sense of validation on something external to us. So for some people, it could be that, you know, they have learned throughout their life and through their sort of upbringing and their experiences that, you know, they are only worthy if they are MD of a company or if they have their own business. So that fear is then driving them, and they are absolutely terrified of losing that standing or that position, because then that means their whole sense of worth has gone. So that is the sort of at the root of that sort of, you know, that example of imposter syndrome. It's really thinking about where you are getting that sense of conditional worth from. And I think that's the main difference between sort of self-belief, self-confidence, and that imposter syndrome.
I wonder, listening to you sometimes, whether the difference between the two as well is quite task orientated and almost like an identity type kind of thing. So I guess what I heard you say was, you know, self-confidence might stop you from doing something, taking action. And, you know, that's what my big pants are all about. You go off, you pull them up, you go off, you take action. Whereas actually for somebody that's got imposter syndrome, that isn't going to work, because actually this is more about them. And if somebody just literally rewinds and plays back kind of what you said, you'll hear the difference, I think, in you saying that the confidence piece is about action almost. I'm paraphrasing here, right? But actually the imposter syndrome is more about you.
Exactly.
As an individual.
Exactly. And I think I mean, we were just sort of briefly chatting before we started to record, and I did a group workshop recently on imposter syndrome, and it's interesting. And I think over the last few years, imposter syndrome has become a bit of a buzzword. It's become quite trendy. And I think a lot of people think that they've got imposter syndrome, when actually I'm not 100% sure that they do. I think that they might have feelings of self-doubt and they might have lost their confidence in many ways. But actually, is it truly imposter syndrome? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, and I agree with you actually, and I did some research as well a while back now, and then I've kind of moved on to something else. But for me, that was one thing that, particularly I think during the pandemic, it became quite a trendy, a buzzword, a trendy thing. And lots of people going, I've got imposter syndrome, but actually what they was describing wasn't how I had understood and read about imposter syndrome. I do think there's, and I'd love to know what you think about this, I do think there's something that you can run. And I'm going to use the word scripts because that's kind of how I've seen it written, like imposter syndrome scripts for some things and others. So if I think about about me, I wouldn't say I've got imposter syndrome at all, but I do have those feelings of, oh, who am I? Maybe when I'm in front of a CEO or somebody who I perceive to be more senior in a big corporate environment, I tend to process it and go, okay, well, come on, Gail, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say overall I've got imposter syndrome. That's probably a bit of doubt about who I am and what I'm doing and whether I can do it. But I wonder whether you can kind of run these two kind of things side by side for different scenarios.
I think you can. And I think it's probably about really sort of defining what's really going on for you in that situation. So when you're sitting in front of that CEO, like really getting clear about what those feelings are, and then what is underneath that feeling. So what is the belief that is beneath that feeling? And actually, is it that you're just nervous and that you're just feeling the nerves because you're sitting in front of someone, it's new, it's exciting, you want to make a good impression? And actually that could be what is at the root cause of it. But if it goes sort of beyond that, and actually it's coming from a place of, I don't feel worthy, I don't feel good enough to be here, who am I to be sitting in front of this CEO? I'm going to get found out at any second. They're going to figure me out for who I really am. And who is that person that I really am? Well, fundamentally, I'm not good enough to be here. I think that is imposter syndrome. Whereas the other, I don't want to say less serious, because that's, again, it's not about saying something's good or bad or more or less serious. But I think it's just about imposter syndrome goes that bit deeper.
Yeah, I was gonna say it runs deeper. So a case in an example there, right, in terms of how you've just described that. I don't have imposter syndrome. That's a little bit of, you're right, it's about excitement, it's about nerves, it's probably for me about the task of, can I deliver what they're asking of me? Exactly. So, and there's our point, isn't it, about people that say they have it. Maybe it's worth them doing a little bit more research too, because actually they might walk away from a conversation or a bit of reading and go, oh, I don't have it. Oh, great.
Exactly.
If I do, then obviously there's other ways that they can get help. So interesting. What can I ask you what your experience is of imposter syndrome, if you're happy to share?
Yeah, of course. So I think if we go back to sort of my experience of burnout that I had in my sort of first business that I had, if I can sort of explain it, that I was literally terrified every single day that I had that business. And I had this just sense of fear that was running through every single thing that I did. And I didn't realize it at the time because I kind of hadn't done any work on myself really at that level. I didn't really understand what was going on. But when I sort of had this period of burnout where sort of that for me was that my anxiety went through the roof, I couldn't function, I couldn't do the things day to day. It actually sort of, when I dug a bit deeper, it came from the fact that I'd set up this business, not because I loved what I did and I really wanted to create a business, but I kind of just wanted to prove that I was good enough and that I was worthy and that I was enough, really. And, when I sort of really picked that apart, for me, that was the imposter syndrome there, because I didn't feel like I was good enough to be running this business, but I was doing it to try and get that sense of worth. So it kind of massively showed up when I had my own business. But again, if you were to ask the outside world, and when I had that period of burnout, everyone was really shocked. They were like, what? Because to the outside world, like, I was really good at putting on the brave face, playing out the act. And again, that's what people with imposter syndrome are brilliant at. Like, they've got it nailed, this act that everything's fine and that they're really competent, but it's what they then feel inside. So I definitely felt it there. And then when I then sort of moved to an in-house role, I was one of two women on a board of directors of men in the construction industry. It was, very male dominated. And I literally would go into every single board meeting and feel like, right, today's the day I'm going to get found out and I'm going to get fired and they're going to get rid of me because I don't know what I'm talking about. But again, to the outside world, I, was an HR director with 20 years experience. I had all the qualifications under the sun, I was achieving good results. But, deep down, that's what I was feeling because I just didn't feel good enough to be there. So yeah, that's kind of how it showed up for me in the past, for sure.
I'm imagining that there are people that are really resonating with kind of what you're saying as well. And what did you? I don't know where to start here. What did you do? So when did you? I suppose it starts with kind of when did you start to recognise that actually you probably needed some help at this point?
Yeah,
And what
definitely.
did you do?
So it was I had a coach because again I'd had loads of therapy, like I'd been to therapy, and that was really helpful for a lot of kind of things. But I wanted to move forward and I wanted to progress and I wanted to create change. So that's why I then went and sought help from a coach. And it was actually the coach that said to me, "Do you know what, Emily? I think this is imposter syndrome, what's going on, because you display this confidence, you've proven that you've got the ability to do this stuff, but you just don't believe it yourself." So it was through a process of kind of emotional coaching, which is what I then went on to study, where we did a lot of inner child work, a lot of sort of going back to really working out what those core wounds were for me. And it was definitely not an easy process, I'm not going to lie. Like, unpacking some of that stuff was quite tough, but I think for me it was life changing. And I know, yeah, I don't want to kind of make it all like, oh, it was amazing, life changing, but it was because I got to the root cause of the problem and I was like, so that's what it is. And actually I can see now how this has played out in various different times of my life, and I now have the tools to kind of work with it and to manage it. And I honestly don't think it's one of those things that you can overcome and it is a quick fix and you're put back together and everything's okay. I think it's one of those things that will crop up at, different times in your lives, but it's just knowing how to support yourself through those periods.
And I guess it's recognizing what are those triggers or all those
Yeah.
scenarios or situations that you're in where actually it might suddenly go, oh, hi, I'm still here, just to let you know.
Absolutely. And yeah, I recently started working with a new client and it cropped up big time because it was kind of, yeah, it just was there. And I was like, okay, you're here again. let's work with it. So yeah, it crops up.
Give us a couple of examples of how you then work with it.
So I think the first thing, and this is what I would say to anyone, is to sit with the feelings that are coming up for you and to really kind of look at what that is. So again, for me, it's I start to feel quite anxious. I start to have those little sort of fluttery, panicky feelings that, for me means that something's a bit off kilter, what's going on. And then it's kind of looking at what the triggers are. So, is it that you are being challenged? Is it that you are in a situation where you are scared of losing the position that you might have been offered, for example? Where are you placing your worth in this situation? And just, again, start to pick a bit deeper under the surface about what's going on. And then I think the next thing is, and I know we say sort of self-care, it's, not about running bubble baths and all that kind of stuff, but to kind of look at how you can then manage that stress and that anxiety that might be coming up for you at that time. So again, for me, it'll be looking at it and going, right, I need to move my body when I feel like this. So how can I sort of go for a walk? How can I go do a class? How can I go do something that gets me out of my body to try and sort of move this feeling through? And then I think it's about trying to reframe what is then going on. So, if it's that actually it's cropping up with, say, a new client that you're working with. Okay, so what's really going on here? Is it that actually for me, it was because I really loved this client that I was working with and I was terrified of losing them. So my mind was going straight to like the worst case scenario when that wasn't even a thing. So for me, I then do this process of collating some evidence to kind of disprove the thought. So literally on my desk in front of me, I've got some emails printed out that's got some, really good feedback that I've had. And it's just about reminding myself that actually I am capable. I can do this. And actually it's just my subconscious trying to keep me safe and trying to prevent me from getting hurt, and that I'm good enough and that I can do it.
Yeah, amazing. God, there's some great stuff in there, isn't there, about this whole sit with the feelings and notice them. I'm just in the process of reading, after months of having it, Emotional Agility by Susan David.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you've read it. It's a great book, and it's all about, these feelings are just signposts, so just sit with them. And I think she uses what the funk, as in what's the function of this emotion, what is it telling me, that the difference between I'm feeling and I am. So I'm feeling sad and I am sad, it 100%. Is the two are really quite different, aren't they?
Totally.
And this self-care thing's coming up quite a lot in terms of self-compassion at the moment, around, like, you, and I laughed to myself when you said about bubble baths, and I've had a few clients just like that, when I've said that, they've kind of rolled their eyes. I'm like, no, hang on a second, let's talk about this. You must have heard of Kristen Neff, Dr. Kristen Neff as well. I love her work around tender and fierce self-compassion, these two kind of yin and yang, I guess, of self-compassion, and how they can work together, and how it's not all about bubble baths, and as nice as they are, right?
Lovely.
It's more about boundaries and stuff like that, and saying no and saying yes as well.
Exactly. And recognizing as well within yourself, when it is genuine fear that is coming up, and actually, what does that fear need to be safe, and how can you try and contain that fear? Because sometimes it might not be fear, you might actually be really excited about something, but fear and excitement, they're so close. And I think it's just that process of self-inquiry, without sort of navel gazing and becoming really deep and meaningful all the time. But it's about recognizing within you, like, okay, so this is how I'm feeling, this is what's coming up for me. Okay, what do I need to support myself in this situation? And it's not about overriding how you're feeling. It's not just about going, right, I'm going to think positive thoughts and everything will be okay. It's about going, okay, I'm feeling fear right now. I'm scared that I might lose this, or that I'm going to get found out, or whatever it is. So how can I put in place some, methods or tools to help myself sort of come back to a place where I feel a bit better?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, definitely. And also this whole getting out of your own body, your own head, taking yourself off for a walk and all of that. And I also think a lot of that has become, some of that stuff stayed with us since the pandemic, hasn't it, as well, in terms of going out for a walk, and we don't need to be at our desk 24/7, all of that kind of thing. No. So interesting. What so some of the research that I've read talks about, I think she calls it the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome. And they're things like procrastination. I'm not going to remember them all now, I've said them, am I? Procrastination, perfectionism, people pleasing. And there's another one and I can't remember it. But those kind of things, do they show up for you, for your clients?
Yeah, definitely. There's things like, so there's the ones that I have. So the ones that I kind of learned were procrastination. So putting things off, because again, taking that action, it's like, well, I might get found out, so I'm just not going to do anything. So I'm just going to stop it. Lying, secrecy. So there's some things as well that people that have imposter syndrome do. So they will, it's about sort of, they downplay themselves. So they might lie about their qualifications. They might go, oh no, I've only got this, or I've only got that. Again, it's just like you're protecting yourself. It's like, I can't be true to who I really am, because if I get found out, like, that's the worst possible thing that could happen. So people pleasing is, I could literally do a whole episode on that.
You might have to come back and do that at some point, because that comes up loads as well.
But perfectionism is a big one. And again, it's this feeling that you're not enough unless what you do is absolutely perfect. But again, one of the big things that I had to learn was that perfection, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as perfect. And actually, you're never going to win. You're never going to win against perfectionism, because it's so subjective. So actually, when I sort of work with people with imposter syndrome, that's kind of one of the first things I want to work out, if they are kind of not suffering from, but if they are a perfectionist, I kind of want to know, because there's a lot of work to sort of unpick around that when it comes to imposter syndrome.
I think as well, the thing is with perfectionism or perfectionists is that they set themselves such high standards that they're impossible for them to reach, but they
Yeah.
also want other people to reach them, and then that's
Yeah.
impossible, and then they're disappointed in the other people when they don't reach their impeccably high standards that don't exist.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
not serving anyone, is it?
It's not. And then you kind of have to say, well, why are you doing this? Why does it have to be perfect? And again, with a lot of people, you track back to kind of, their experiences at school, or that their parents only valued them if they got A stars in their exams. And that kind of drive for being absolutely perfect has then carried with them their whole lives. And it's just not necessary. There are other ways, for sure.
The fourth one that I had forgotten was paralysis, as in just completely stops us from doing anything at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I see that all the time with clients, that it's almost like then people go into that analysis paralysis, especially with sort of certain personality types. I do sort of a lot of work with different personality profiling, and there are certain personality types I see it in all the time. And it's like they will come to a coaching session and they will have done all this work on data and reports, and I'm like, this is lovely, but have you actually taken any action? They're like, nope.
No. I just keep reading and reading and reading to find out, and there comes a point, doesn't there, where you go, actually I've just got to crack on now and do something.
Exactly.
Analysis paralysis, definitely. So we've talked loads here, and we could probably, I say this to a lot of my guests, but we could probably talk all day. We could probably come back and do whole episodes on people pleasing and perfectionism and all of that. But if somebody's listening to this now and they're thinking, oh my God, I've totally got imposter syndrome, what would you advise them now to go away and think about, to identify whether they truly do have it or not?
I think it's about getting really sort of honest and really thinking about how and when this is showing up for you and what those feelings really are. So taking yourself off somewhere quiet, maybe doing a bit of meditation if that's what you're into, going for a walk, or just getting to a place where you can really clear your mind and really think about how it shows up. And when it does show up, what does that feel like to you? Because I think, as we've kind of talked through, with imposter syndrome, there will be this underlying fear that you are going to get found out and that you are a total fraud and that you do not deserve to be where you are. I think if any of that comes through for you, then it probably is, I was going to say people pleasing, it probably is imposter syndrome. Whereas if it is this sense of, self-doubt, you're scared, you're nervous, then it might just be that there needs to be some work around that. And that's, it's great work to do, but it might not be sort of at the depths of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because there is quite a fine line, I think, here.
There is. I think there is.
Yeah.
And again, I don't like to judge. And this is what I said in my sort of workshop that I did. It's like, it's okay if you think that this is imposter syndrome. We can still work with it. There's still loads of great work that we can do to help you feel better. It's just, you might not have that label, and that's okay as well. It's just, and I think it's important that people don't see it as a label or a box that they have to fit into. All the feelings are valid. It just kind of helps you understand what might be going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the things that, are doing confidence coaching around, your inner critic, if you've got imposter syndrome, your inner critic is like the radio that you can never turn off in your head. Whereas, whereas in more kind of confidence coaching, that inner critic is a bit more manageable. So and this is where I think there's this really kind of fine line between the two. It's so interesting. What then would be your very top 3 tips that would be actionable right now for somebody to go off, and if they think they've got it, or they know they've got imposter syndrome, in terms of how they can manage it?
Yeah. So I think number 1, look at what those thoughts and those beliefs are that are coming up for you. So go away, write them down. Then I think it's about, I do this exercise with clients all the time. It's called putting your thoughts on trial. Have you done that before? It's an NLP exercise where you take your thoughts and you write them down. So it might be that, I'm rubbish in board meetings, or whatever that is. you would write that down, and then you would kind of lift yourself up out of the room and look down on the situation, and then in your mind you would act as like the judge and jury on those thoughts. So, what is the evidence that this is true versus what is the evidence that this thought isn't true, and you can collate those evidence points against those thoughts. And I think someone that has sort of really deep rooted imposter syndrome, they will find it extremely hard to believe the evidence to support that actually they are good at what they do. So I think if that comes up for you, it's then about thinking, okay, so what is actually at the next level for me? So what is really going on here? Like, what is the worst case scenario that I am fearing? And actually looking at that core belief, and maybe sort of seeking some help as well if it's something that's really paralyzing for you. But I think as well, like with, if it comes up that you can work with those limiting beliefs and that you can look at that evidence, then it's about every single day looking at your list and doing some mantras, doing some self-talk around going, actually, this is not true. And like, I've heard you speak before about giving that name in your head a name, calling it something. Mine's called Rebecca. It's like, thank you, Rebecca. That's really interesting, but it's not helpful right now. Here's the evidence against it. So I think that's what I would, advise if people just want to kind of help themselves in the moment.
I love the thoughts on trial. I do know about that. I just called it something else. It's funny, or I just use it. But it's now got a name, right? So like the inner critic, mine's called Betty. Yeah. Oh, Emily, this is so interesting. So if people want to know more about you and the work that you do, or indeed want to talk to you about imposter syndrome, where can they find you?
So I tend to hang out on LinkedIn quite a bit. So that's kind of where I tend to post quite a lot of my stuff. But my website is the People Consultancy, and it's .uk, not .co.uk. Interesting. But yeah, I'm there. So yeah, drop me a line and happy to have a chat.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll put everything in the show notes as well so that you can connect with Emily if you'd like to. Emily, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been really interesting. Welcome. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So join us next time on the Confidence Conversations podcast.